event has started.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, everyone. Welcome to today's audit committee. You probably see me zooming in and out because I'm looking at the papers on the same screen as looking at you as well. So bear with me if I don't see your questions. Okay. So if we make a start, are there any apologies for absence? No. Any declarations of interest?
I do apologise, Chair, wasn't quick enough off the mark with the microphone. Yes, the apologies come from Councillor Mark Whitcutt and Councillor Richard White. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? No? Okay. If we go into the minutes of the last meeting then, I'll go through them page by page and just shout out if you got any amendments, okay? Page 3.
Yes, Chair.
Yeah.
Sorry, just in terms of the attendance list, just to flag up, at the moment it's got me as attending the last meeting, but I wasn't there. It was Ramin Khan, our audit lead, who was attending at the last meeting.
Can you change that, Pamela?
Yes, of course, Chair, no problem.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Page 4.
Yes, I have something on that page, please.
Yeah.
I believe Herbie was at the last meeting as well. We share the same surname, but no relation to each other. So there are under questions on bullet point 2. I'd like to raise something which I think was something I brought up at the meeting. And could we slightly amend the last sentence? I asked whether there was an estimate for it's reproduced here as council area of redundancies. Just to clarify that, it was the number of redundancies. Were we monitoring those in the terms of the likelihood of redundancies of citizens? It could be read as perhaps council staff.
Okay. Have we got enough to change there, Pamela, or would you like perhaps more precise wording?
No, that's fine, thank you.
Thank you, Pam.
Okay.
Thanks very much, Councillor.
On to page 5. Page 6. Page
Sorry,
7.
Chair. Page 5. Couldn't get in. Can you see on page 5 where it says agreed, 2 paragraphs up above that? Reese's, the head of business and people change, advised the committee that they could go back to the service area to find out more detail. Does that mean Reese is going to go back or we've got to go back?
No, I took that as being that Reese would go back.
Yeah, so out of that.
That's what he said in the meeting.
Yeah, so can the minutes be changed?
Absolutely.
And obviously we're waiting for Reese to come back to us on it.
Yeah, perhaps Reese can update us either now or late in the next meeting. Reese, are you there?
Chair, I'm here and I'll apologise.
Sorry, you're very quiet there, Reese. Can you move your microphone closer to yourself?
Can you hear me?
That's better, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I've just put my headphones on. Yeah, apologies. So I'll do an update for you in writing into the minutes. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Because I misread that bit of the minutes.
If it's easier, if you can drop us an email or something.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay,
sure.
that's great. That's page 5, page 6. Nothing there. Page 7. Treasury management is coming up later. Page 8. Page 9. And page 10. So in item 8 on page 10, the agenda item to be reviewed at January 21 audit committee. I noticed that's not on the agenda. And Pamela, is there a reason why it's not on the agenda?
I do apologise for that oversight, Chair. Oh, sorry, Andrew's speaking. Just one moment.
Thanks.
Thanks, Anne. Yeah, Chairman, we agreed in the minutes that we would call them in spring 2021 because the majority of the music staff had been furloughed for most of the year, so they wouldn't have had an opportunity to address most of what was in the action plan. So it was agreed that we would postpone that until later on in the year, give them a bit of a chance to make the improvements required, and then call them in springtime, kind of March, April time, into Audit Committee.
Okay. Can we just update the minutes to reflect that action then?
No problem, Chair, I can do that.
Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Chair. On the bottom of the paragraph, the Chair requested that the committee received an update in January 21, as there's still an issue around tracing musical instruments. Is that still a go ahead then with the request in the springtime as well? No.
I would assume that it's linked together.
Yes, it would be, Chairman. Yeah.
Well noted, though. Okay, back to the minutes. Page 11. Okay, we got that on the next agenda item, and then page 12. So we're happy with the minutes? Yeah. So they've duly noted and approved. Thank you. Moving on to the next item. Although we got corporate risk register next, can I suggest that we actually jump ahead to item 9, calling in the head of Children and Young People Services and Service Manager. I think that'll help out both the officers as well as, well, initially it was going to be for one of the councillors as well, but I realised that some of the meetings have moved around, but I think it would help the officer in charge if we could deal with this matter now and then move on. Is that okay with you? Is that okay with everyone? Yeah.
No problem, Chair. Could you just tell us which page we're working to?
All right, sorry. So this would be item 9, so it's page 109 of your pack.
Well, I've got down 181.
179 to 188.
All right, so this is item 9, second consecutive unsatisfactory audit opinion, special guardianship orders.
Okay, Chairman, shall I give a brief introduction and then let Sally and Joe follow?
If you could, Andrew, that'd be great.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, members. Thank you, Chairman. This is in relation to some audit work that's been undertaken and the regular reports that we report into Audit Committee. We've undertaken a review of special guardianship orders, the SGO and stroke kinship payments. We identified it was an unsatisfactory audit opinion in the original audit, and then we agreed an action plan to move forward. We then agreed to do a follow-up audit to see what had been implemented in terms of the action plan, and because of issues within the team itself, very limited action had been actually taken to move this forward. So therefore, this resulted in a second unsatisfactory audit opinion, and then as part of the protocol within Audit Committee, that signals a call-in for the respective manager and the head of service to respond in terms of the action plan, to identify why limited action has actually been undertaken between the two audits, and to give members assurance that improvements will be made now moving forward. And in order to assist this process, the team have put together a template, so there'll be a consistency in terms of when we call officers in to Audit Committee, and that's what's been completed now by Sally and Joe. And I'm happy to hand over to Joe and Sally to explain further to Audit Committee the justification of where we're at in terms of the second unsatisfactory audit opinion, Chairman.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I'm Sally Jenkins, I'm Head of Children's Services, and Joe Llewellyn is here as well. He's the Service Manager responsible for this area of work. And I understand this was discussed at the last meeting, and there were still some outstanding questions in respect of what had been presented then when Joe and I were both unable to attend, unfortunately. Between the two audit reports, we did have quite a challenging period in children's services where we had a very depleted management team Instead of having 5 managers, we had 2 for quite a significant period, and that led to a gap in a number of areas of our services in terms of taking work forward. In addition, what we also saw were we were awaiting new guidance out from Welsh Government, and also further work that was being done, in particular in Wales, by Afra Cymru, which is a national organisation working with kinship carers to look at the best packages of, in particular, support, but also guidance around financial payments to special guardianship carers. And I suppose the last element of this is that there is also a National England and Wales piece of work with the Public Law Working Group in Family Justice to also change some of the parameters in this work. So hence a series of reasons why there was a delay in us implementing the necessary changes. I'm pleased to be able to report to committee now that since then we have a full management team and now have had for some months, which has been incredibly welcome. Jo has taken up that post with responsibility for, in fact, a newly created team. So what we actually did was we took a very proactive step to the whole issue of special guardianship in its widest sense, both in terms of financial responsibility to carers, but also the support responsibility that we have as a local authority. So it's a broad sweep. So our family and friends team was put together with a combination of existing resources from within core children's services, which we redeployed to create the original team. And we've subsequently been lucky enough to attract some intermediate care funding from Welsh Government to make the team a little larger, which has been really welcome. The team now supports special guardianship carers, kinship foster carers, and also children and families where they're placed with their parents, but the children are subject to a care order. So the local authority holds parental responsibility, even though the child is living with their parents. I think I have to say that the team is extremely busy. And the work has grown exponentially, in part because of a change of direction and culture within Welsh Government and the expectation on all of us to work with special guardians in a different way. But I think also because of a very proactive response from Jo and her team to create a really good offer for special guardians. Included in that is in a change in the way we undertake the financial assessments for special guardians to bring a proper consistency to what we're able to do and what we're able to offer them. And linked to that is a much better understanding of what the financial responsibilities of the local authority are, but also what we need to do with the special guardians to take that forward. I think that I hope that Andrew would agree that we are in a better place now. I don't know, Jo, if there's anything that you wanted to add before we ask for questions.
I think I'll mute myself, sorry. I think there's been a lot of changes that's taken place in the team. What happened with the audit was, unfortunately, we hadn't taken all the financial assessments over into the team at this time of the second audit, and we couldn't evidence because we hadn't had enough assessments come in, the new assessments, to evidence the changes that we've done. I know there will be a further audit, and we're looking to start that very, very soon. Well, we're not, audit are starting to look at it very, very soon to start, but I'm very confident that we're such a much better place all over with the team and the support we provide to our special guardians.
I was going to say, are there any, thanks for introducing the responses there, and I appreciate you coming in. And I'd like to say as well, Councillor Montford is joining the group as well, so if that could be minuted by Pamela, that'd be great. Are there any questions from anybody? I have a couple myself, but I'd like to open it up to the committee first.
Could I start, Chair, please?
Yes, certainly.
When I met you first, Sally, it's a few years ago now, I'd like to have a look at the underlying problem as to why there was an issue with the finance being taken forward. You said you only had 2 managers out of 5. Are we still suffering a high turnover of social workers?
As I say, we now have a complete management team and have had for some months, which is great. We do have some change in social workers, but I have to say is that we currently only have 1 agency social worker in the whole of children's services, which out of 340 staff isn't bad going. Right. And certainly when we can compare to a number of our neighbours, we do have vacancies and we do have challenges with filling posts, as they do everywhere in children's social care. Our retention of staff once they come to us is very good. And the other place where we've been really positive in being able to attract staff is they come to us as students and then they stay with us. So I think we are in a very, very different place to where we were when I first came to the local authority in 2013. I think it's one of those things that is always a watching brief and always a worry, because you can quite quickly go from being reasonably staffed to being really spectacularly understaffed pretty quickly in children's services. But I do feel considerably more confident than I have done in the past about it. I mean, we nearly always have some vacancies, I think it's fair to say, but we are able to recruit, and we also know that the majority of people who are leaving us for good reasons. They're going on for promotion, so it's not as if we're losing people because they're unhappy. We're losing for positive reasons. So yeah, it is significantly better than it was some years ago.
Thank you. I don't think anyone would criticise social workers. They do a wonderful job, which I think very, very few of us would ever want to even contemplate doing. And you know, these are minor financial problems that we can get over. Great. But I hope it won't reflect on your teams who work so hard. Thank you very much.
Before I ask my questions, Councillor Thomas, do you have something to raise?
Yes, please. I've just got three things that I want to do, just run by you. Although it couldn't be evidenced at the time of the audit, had most of the payments actually gone through?
I mean, yes. Right. So I think the part of the problem with the audit was the processes and the procedures, but I don't think that families were left without money. That isn't what happened. It's the time that we were taking and the process that we had in place to properly assess them. But families were not left without support, financial support. No, Councillor Thomas.
That's good to hear. Is it part of the process that an impact assessment was done around that time? You know, on behalf of the families.
An impact assessment?
Yes. You know, was it part of your process at that time that if there were hiccups in, you know, different aspects and different teams, their engagement in this, was it actually looked at the time in terms of an impact assessment on those families?
We don't do an impact assessment in that way. I mean, we carry out a number of assessments with families. Families that caring for children on the basis of special guardianship will have undergone a series of assessments linked to the court and the making of those orders. Right. They have a financial assessment, and they also have an assessment which can, well, the whole package of assessment contributes to their special guardianship support plan. And included throughout that is the implications of the support and what needs to be in place. I mean, it's not called an impact assessment in that way. I suppose the outcome is similar. Joe, have you got?
It's just, yeah, what we do is we have two forms of yearly reviews, we call them, rather than an impact assessment. So they have the financial review, and they also have sort of a needs-based review on a yearly basis. So they have both of that, and that's all set up in the team, and that continues. Okay, and that's part of the regulations, so we have to do it.
Okay, thank you. Yes. The Director of Social Services report was at full council this week, and it was highlighted that the preventative side of social work is paramount now, I suppose, particularly through these times. Are the improvements which you've made, Joe, through bringing those teams together and putting it in one place now, has that strengthened the preventative side of this, which of course is hugely important, you know, with this most vulnerable group of children that we have?
I'll just start, Joe, and then I'll come. I think, I mean, the challenge with this group is that in some senses they are already vulnerable children by the time they come. I realise that. Yeah. I suppose what we're really clear about is that this type of work is working with families. So it is preventative in the sense of very much keeping children within their birth families rather than becoming looked after. So yes, it is absolutely part of that preventative journey to ensure that children stay with their family rather than becoming looked after. And I think, Joe, I think it's fair to say we've I think Joe would agree, we've done a lot of work ensuring that the support plans that we put in place are tailor-made for each family. So it's not a generic response, it is very much a needs-led response for that family and that child. And the other element of this is recognising that families will dip in and out of support with us for special guardians. Some we will never offer them any support because they don't wish to have it and they don't need it, whereas others may have support for a period from us. Things may settle down, things may be quiet, and then some 2 or 3 years later, something will happen that will trigger off a need for further support, and then we can go back in. So yeah, it is linked to that preventative agenda, but it is from the start some of the most vulnerable children who end up in these arrangements.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, I think this is why I'm so concerned about it, because I recognise that, and I recognise the importance of keeping those children grounded with families in the most difficult of circumstances. Thank you.
Joe, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I was going to say we do we have, in terms of preventative work, because they're on an SGO, they have the yearly reviews. So we do. So for every case that is an SGO that was in our area still remains with us, we do the need reviews. So in terms of preventative, we get in contact with them every year to say, are there any issues? How can we support? So in terms of preventing things escalating, we do now have that system and process in place to provide that support. We have a duty desk and we send out newsletters to our SGO carers to say this is our duty desk, get into contact with us. So we're trying to always make sure that we're promoting ourselves, if that makes sense. And we've got leaflets and flyers to say that we're here to support SGO carers within Newport. And actually, the provision that we provide in Newport, we should be very proud of, because we're seen as one of the best practices in Wales. We've gone through and we've done training, we've gone to Sally's done conferences about the practice provided in Newport. We deal a lot with Africumry, which Sally was talking about earlier, and what we're involved in Newport as well as a piece of research looking into SGO breakdowns and what the factors are involved with that. It's part of Cardiff University, Welsh Government and Africumry, so it's a big piece of work across Wales, and we're involved in that so we can actually look at what are the factors that perhaps cause breakdowns and issues, so we can also try and put that into our practice as well. So we're really proactive within the team to provide support.
You're on mute, Councillor Thomas. Kate, you're on mute.
New phrase of the year, isn't it? You're on mute. Yeah, thank you. That sounds as if it's been well thought through, and that you're really trying to think ahead of this to make, you know, all our projects here a success. And thank you.
Okay, so just 2 things from me. The first one is, and I think you've already answered this. Obviously, when you had a big shortage of staff, I think committee were very they were a bit concerned that the money wasn't going to the relevant families at the due time, especially in the last meeting. I was just wondering, there's always a danger with financial controls that actually stops you making the payments that's required for the most vulnerable people. I'm just wondering if during this period, could the controls be altered slightly to ease your burden, especially when you have a big loss of staff, and actually from a risk point of view, from a financial control point of view, there's a lot that can be done to streamline controls, but so still satisfy head of finance and auditors that there's sufficient control of the money, but take away some of the bureaucracy that you face as well. Just wondering if that was an issue for you.
I think now we're in a position where that isn't the case because of the way the financial assessments, I mean, in a way, because of establishing the new team with the better processes, in effect, we've done that. I think it's probably fair to say. So, and it's just having the consistency in who is carrying out those financial assessments is the single biggest difference. I mean, the system is then automated and is run through, so those controls are there. So I would feel confident that we are in a much better place, and that the bureaucracy that you mentioned, I think in some ways we've diminished it, but still have a better system in place in terms of the management.
Well, I'm glad about that, because I know from my own perspective, very often organisations and living in the 1800s very often in terms of control, especially local authorities. I've mentioned this numerous times in audit committees. So from my perspective, I think there's a lot that can be done, not only for yourselves, but for others, to strip away unnecessary burdens of bureaucracy. The second point that I'd like to raise is looking at the action plan. You seem now to have ticked off everything that was identified by audit, which is great to see. And Andrew will confirm that he's now happy with that report. But secondly, am I right in thinking that the reasons for the 2 unsatisfactory opinions wasn't that you couldn't be bothered to action the recommendation, but actually simply down to the lack of staff?
I think it was a combination. I think it certainly wasn't that we couldn't be bothered. That certainly wasn't the case. No.
The wrong phrase, but you get my drift.
Yeah, I mean, if absolutely honestly, I think we hadn't really grasped some of the issues that we needed to remedy around special guardianship. I think we were, it's not that we couldn't be bothered, it was perhaps that it's really risen up the agenda in terms of being an area of importance for local authorities as the numbers of children that we have on special guardians increases, because that's one of the big factors in this, is we're seeing a year-on-year increase in children subject to special guardian. And I think in a way it was something where almost things had evolved rather than us proactively thinking about the best way to do something. So I mean, what we've got now is we've got a single team who are carrying out the work, who are working with the families, who are doing the assessments, both in terms of finance, but also in assessing the suitability of individuals to be special guardianship carers. Whereas before, I'm loath to use the word, it was almost haphazard. Probably a bad word to use in an audit committee, but I think it was scattered across some teams. It wasn't pulled together. Those teams hadn't been fully trained in what they needed to do, so it was haphazard and probably not an audit word, random. So 2 non-audit words.
Consistency word that seems to be popping up quite a bit here. So
yeah,
that's now been addressed by the sounds of it. So going forward, yeah. I don't think there'll be an issue from what you can say.
I certainly hope not.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else from anyone else? No. Andrew, are you now happy with that?
Thank you, Chairman. I think that you'll see, and members will see, that there's quite a comprehensive response from Sally and Joe, which is really reassuring. I would say we were concerned about the lack of coordination, really, Sal, in terms of the process, and the fact that the processes were a bit inconsistent, I think, when we did the work. But the value of payments going through was quite considerable, and that is why we put it in our audit plan in terms of the undertaking the work. What we will do now is build that back into our planning to do another follow-up review. Okay. We'll go through the process again with Joe, and I'll be reporting back the updated audit opinion to audit committee in due course. I think we've developed quite a good relationship with Joe at an operational level, with Rob in particular, and we tend to be, I'd hope we are more pragmatic than traditional, and I think we're prepared to listen to different ways of doing things, not stick our heels in just for the sake of it for a control to operate when it's not practical to do so. Yeah. So I'm happy for me and my team to work with service managers, and in particular Joe, moving forward with kinships, and I'll be reporting back in due course to audit committee, hopefully a more improved audit opinion.
Okay, that's fantastic. So I think we're all happy looking at the nodding heads thing. So are we okay to accept the recommendations and the fact that we look forward to the improved audit opinion in a few months' time? Thanks for both of you coming tonight.
Thank you very much.
And everything.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Cheers, Bob.
Right, so if we can go on to the next item, which is item 4, which is a corporate risk register. And before we start, I'd just like to remind everyone again that we are not here to go through each risk. Our role as audit committee is just simply to see what the risk process is and ask questions around that. So for example, this report is obviously quite out of date, with 4 months old, so it might be a question around how how much of a living document is it with the council? But we're not there to say, should that be number 5 or should it be risk rating 25 or something like that? Does that make sense? So hopefully, Rhys, that gives a bit of context around what it is we're looking for.
Thanks, Chair. That was a bit of my introduction. So it's you managed to compress that a little bit. Thank you. Thanks very much. So I'm going to give a very brief introduction. I think Paul Flint's on the call is going to cover off some of the detail within the report, and then, as always, happy to take any questions, discuss any points with you within the parameters that the chair has just laid out.
It's after your job.
So obviously, as the chair said, this is the Q2 risk register. So we're looking back in time for this particular one to the end of September for that period of time. So just to contextualise it, the risk register monitors risks that may prevent us from achieving our objectives, generally laid out in the corporate plan or service plans, or the delivery of services to service users and citizens within Newport. So they are the big critical ones. This report covers those risks that have been escalated into the corporate risk register. So I think we discussed last time there are a whole range of other risks that are managed and monitored and mitigated within service plans. So committee members who are also on scrutiny committees will be able to challenge some of those things through the scrutiny process. As the chair said, the role of the audit committee is to review and monitor the corporate governance and risk management arrangements in place rather than scrutinising individual risks within there. And chair, as we talked about in briefing, just to highlight, there's an additional paragraph within the report and the background, which is in relation to the Local Government Elections Act, as it is now, which members have had a member seminar on, and a presentation from myself, the Chief Executive, and Tracy McKim, who's also on the call. And that's specifically in relation to potential changes around performance management. And there's some potential changes then in relation to audit committees within that. So, Chair, I know we had a conversation about it in briefing. Happy to talk around some of that as part of this discussion, if you feel appropriate.
If you can give a brief outline to it. I realise councillors have had a briefing on it, but what I would be interested in is what particular changes do you see happening to the audit committee? So do we become an audit and risk committee, for example? I understand there's going to be more lay members coming onto the committee. It may be better to have a separate item on a different agenda for this.
Yeah, Chair, I'm more than happy to cover off a couple of those points. We've obviously responded to the consultation as a local authority, so that report's gone through Cabinet and has gone to Welsh Government, so they're still considering it. We're not looking for the implementation of any changes until April 1st, 2022, and again, just to say this, I think the original intention was this would have come into force on April 1st this year, but obviously COVID has actually knocked back quite a lot of the timescales around the bill as a whole. There are potential changes for the role of committee, specifically around audit committee, about audit and risk and audit performance, and changes within that around the performance management requirements of local authorities as well. Okay, so Jay, it might be worth scheduling a session to go through that once Welsh Government have made their mind up following their consideration of the consultation. So if we just discuss that with Democratic Services and yourself.
Yeah, because probably September, October time would be a good opportunity for that. And by the way, Paul, thanks for sending stuff through the other day about that. I certainly think it's something that we as a committee need to have a handle on going into the next year. So if we could get onto the work plan later on, that would be great. Or if you deal with Pamela and Anne outside the meeting to arrange the best time for you, really. Yeah,
that's no problem, Chair. Okay. And as you said, and we fed this back to members when we had a member seminar, there's potential for changes for all our committees, from scrutiny committee and audit committee as well, around membership So
Okay.
those are some of the things we need to probably cover off with that.
That's great. So going back to the risk register then, I know everyone is really likes this risk register, and it's worth saying that we've come a long way over the last 3-4 years on risk. So are there any questions on it? I have one or two myself, but I'd like to open it up to the floor first.
If nobody else is going.
Yeah, Chair, I got my hand up there a second, Chair.
I've got an observation, and Chair, you must correct me if you think I'm getting a little close to the risk and not sticking with the process. I am rather disappointed with the table of risks on page 15, and I find it disappointing that only one risk has been closed out, and I understand that was a relatively minor financial risk, but the rest of it seems very static. And obviously, as I think I explained very badly at the last meeting, when I see a risk or I see an issue, I expect it not to just form part of a risk register, but I expect it to be dealt with as close to source as possible. It is an observation, it's not a question. Thank you, Chair.
Can I just add to that as well, because I agree with the observation. It's one that's been raised many times, I think, over the years. But for example, if you look at the table at the back where you have the target, you have the risk number, and then you can move to a target risk. The reason why I feel sometimes it's like a tick box exercise is that the target risk is 10. Now, by my understanding, the only way you can get to a 10 is if, for example, there's a high probability of like a 5 and a 2 of low impact. So 5 times 2 gives you 10. But it feels like somebody's come along and said, oh, 10 is a good number to have as a target, rather than should it be 9 or 6. And then I think, well, if you say that 10 is a target, it implies there's a risk appetite in order for us to achieve a 10 and not a 5. Now, I can't remember there being any agreement on risk appetite within the council. So, by definition, there has to be no risk appetite if a policy isn't developed. So, to me, when I'm looking at the risk register, it doesn't feel at the moment that it's still part of the day-to-day psyche of managers to know what is a valid risk and not. So to me, for example, I can understand that in certain areas you would accept a risk. We all do it as managers. You have to accept certain risks. And yet there's other people I work with who will not accept any risk whatsoever. Now, within those two parameters, you're going to get a situation where with a risk, you'd expect it to be taken off the register, or certainly actions taken to get that risk coming down. And yet, as the councillor rightly said, month on month, it feels like these things are quite static. Now, I appreciate we're only getting the summary and not the detail below it. I don't want to get the detail either. But can you just reassure us that our understanding is not quite correct?
Chair, could I come back in on that one with your permission? I tried to probe the matrix numbers some meetings ago, and advised I thought that 5 was a poor matrix to use because it brings out too many equal risks. If you've only got 25 numbers to play with, if you go up to 6 by 6, 7 by 7, oil industry 100 by 100, there are other ways of achieving a better outcome so as that managers can relate to the most pressing risk at the time. But if you stick with 5 by 5, you will get too many equal risks.
Yeah.
All I was trying to get over. Thank you.
Fair point.
Chair, sorry.
Before we move on, Kate, can we
that's fine.
get an answer from Rhys or Paul first, then we come back to you if that's okay.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. Paul might want to just update on where we are with risk appetite in a moment. So, I think as without repeating the conversation we had in the last meeting, most this represents the top of the tree as far as risks the organisation is dealing with. The vast majority of risks the organisation is dealing with are dealt with at a service and service area level. They come and go as we manage and mitigate those risks and overcome them. These are, I suspect, you know, if you're looking for your wicked issues across the organisation, these are those. You know, there's a challenge within it, isn't there, about saying, well, actually, if that thing is going to be with us, it's reasonably unresolvable, does it stay on the risk register or not? But some of these are, if you look at them, are incredibly difficult to do in the short to medium term and actually overcome. If I talk about something like cybersecurity, for instance, we had a plan out of that. That would have probably come off our corporate risk register prior to COVID-19 because we had a series of mitigations in place. The reason it escalated as far as score is concerned and looks like we don't seem to be doing anything about it is because for several points during COVID-19, we've had national guidance from the National Cyber Agency to tell us about the increased risk because of home working. So totally outside of our control, totally override some of the mitigations that we've got in place. So, you know, there are plenty of things going on in order to try and manage some of these things down. Something like ash dieback is a significant problem at the moment, but there is a path out of that, and at a point that will come to an end. I would like to say, hopefully, the same with the COVID-19 pandemic as well. You know, there is a path out of that to a point where it ceases to become what looks like a static risk on the risk register. Okay. Some of the others are more problematic and more difficult because they actually require significant injections of funding in order to move us from the position we're in. So they are more of a challenge. Paul, I don't know if you want to say something about the
Yeah, I just want to address 2 points raised by the chair. The first point in relation to risk appetite. Risk appetite would have been presented to the audit committee this time last year, I believe, and that would have been covered off in the risk management policy, which yourselves fell back on and was subsequently agreed by Cabinet, I believe in June last year. So the risk appetite is actually covered off in the risk management policy. So it is there, and it is something that we do, and we're looking to review again as a part of our annual review of risk management. We're going to go back to the Cabinet and to officers to reconfirm and with yourselves around the risk appetite for the council and whether that needs to change and be more reflective in terms of, you know, new risks such as the COVID-19 risk, etc., which has come across. In relation to your second point raised around the target risk scores, some of those points I think were quite valid and something which we introduced as part of this new risk management process last year. And whenever we identify new risk, it's always assessed with the risk owner to determine what the level of inherent risk. So that is risk in which inherently comes with the particular risk, and then also a target risk score in which we try to aim and push service areas to work towards in order to mitigate against the risk which has been raised. Some of those risks, so you will see, for example, cybersecurity or climate change, there is a level of inherent risk that unfortunately we as a local authority have very little control over, and therefore we have to accept some of that risk as an authority and as part of our processes in what we do on a day-to-day basis. So cybersecurity is always a good one, is that there will always be constant threats and attacks against the local authority, and that is just something which we have to accept and then get assurance from our service providers, the shared resource service, around the controls in place to mitigate and prevent those risks from happening in the first place. So I'm always in conversation with heads of service and with the risk owners to make sure that when a risk reaches that point, whether they are still comfortable for that risk to be closed, or whether they would just like to see those controls in action a little bit more to assure themselves that those risks can be then taken off the risk register. There will be in the next quarter, that'll be quarter 3, more risks coming off as a result of them reaching their target risk score and therefore subsequently coming off their own service risk registers. And this is a conversation which is also raised to CMT as well. Whenever a risk is escalated or whether a risk is comes new to the corporate risk register, those discussions are always had with CMT as well. So there's a process behind all of this, and it's a continuous discussion and ongoing assurance that we try to gauge from the service areas to make sure that the controls that they have in place are doing what they should be doing.
Okay, that's great. There's 3 raised hands, so can I go to Jason first, then Laura, and then Kate? Okay, so Jason.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It was just a bit of an observation as well, actually. Well, I think Paul just sort of briefed up on it a little bit as well. You know, do you see much change happening in Q3 and Q4 with the risks at the moment, with the current situation that we're in?
So yes, I do expect that there will be some risk changes. We're starting the next cycle of planning for next year's service plans, and as part of that process in general, we ask all service areas to review their risks and to look forward in terms of any risks that could be emerging as a result of potential new legislation coming in, new technologies that they might be looking for, or actually if they're planning to do a new initiative, there might be additional risks that come through that as well. So it's an ongoing process that we do ask service areas to review their risks and to then look at any risks that may no longer deem to be a risk, and they will have to then justify as to why it would come off their own risk register. So there is a continuous process in around reviewing the risks in the organisation.
Okay.
Yeah, so yeah, it just seems like, I know there's so much red on there, but would you see that sort of redness again, like in Q3 and Q4?
Yeah, I'd expect, so for example, Brexit is a really good example here, where in Q2 that was quite, that escalated up to a 16, mainly because at that point in time at the end of Q2, there was a lot of uncertainty around whether we would agree a trade negotiation with Europe. As we came towards the end of the third quarter, there was a trade agreement, and that risk has now decreased because the threat was no longer there in terms of the economy and in terms of businesses and what potential threats that could have posed to areas like Newport. So we do expect some of those risks to change in Q3 and Q4 as we come out through COVID and Brexit.
Okay, thanks. Can I pass over to Laura?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make an observation actually and just compliment you on the actual layout of the report and of the corporate risk register. I'm finding it much easier to read and much easier to get through now, the way that it's been laid out and you've got the risks separately. So it's made a big difference, I think. So obviously, my background is in that area. So for me, I'm sure that other people who are not in that background find that it's much more simplified. I always get shocked by all the red on there, though, because I'm used to red being threat to life in my business. So when you see a load of red on there with hashtag back, you're thinking, oh my God, and then you realise then that it's a strategic failure rather than, as I said, threat to life, which I'm used to. But no, it was just a compliment on the actual published risk register. It looks really good.
Okay, that's great. Kate, you wanted to raise something earlier? You're on mute, I think.
Sorry, I did switch I'm having a bit of problems with the
You seem to be in and out. You're breaking up a bit. It's a bit like from the old days when there's media.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah, I've switched. Yeah, everything frozen. I think it's my end of things. Really, just share. Laura mentioned it being very easy to read, and yes, I would agree with that. And actually, Jason, I've forgotten what you said now, but I know I agreed with that at the time, and was going to mention that. And the phone's going off now. Looking at really trying to keep this high level and taking the message from last time. I was just quite surprised really to see there was only one risk had been closed when we just seem to be in such turbulent times, and we know that the situation was constantly, we were entering a new phase with identified risks. We didn't know what they were necessarily going to be, but we knew that things were going to be progressively more tricky. And I was just surprised that there weren't, we closed one. I know things went up internally, but what would be the normal sort of movement on that list in the second quarter?
I'm just trying to gauge, is that during normal time if we weren't in COVID, or would that?
Yeah.
So what usually happens every quarter, we would be asking service areas to review their risk scores and also to review the mitigating actions against them. Yeah. And then as part of that process, we would then go back and challenge the service areas. If they hadn't reached their target risk score, we would then say to them, are you satisfied that that risk can be closed, or do you wish to monitor it a little bit longer? So normal times, I would probably say that we would expect at least 2 or 3 risks to close, perhaps once a quarter or once every 6 months. Right. As you go through the financial year. I think you'll see in Q3 that there will be a few more changes coming up in terms of some of the risks being closed. So I would probably say that if you look at when we come to report Q3, which I believe will be in March, I think you will see a little bit more movement in terms of what's happening with the corporate risk register and also across the service area risks as well.
Right. I think I probably thought we would be more categories would have been entering, not the main categories, obviously, but we might see more things enter. Just with the.
I think what we have to remember. Sorry, Katie, you're freezing up again, but if I can just, sorry, you're coming in and out a bit. I think what we have to remember is that this is only a summarised document as well. It's not the whole list. So inevitably, it comes back to Councillor Hooran's position earlier, where if you only got 5 by 5, inevitably you're not going to get as much movement as if you say a 7 by 7. And that's something that perhaps we could consider further down the line, and that would enable the council then to have a bit more movement. Don't think it's for answering now, but it's just something to consider. So with an eye on the time, is there anything else that people would like to ask about this report? No. So on that basis, can we duly note the register, and thanks for your time tonight, both of you.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, committee.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. So moving on to the next item, which is item 5, internal audit plan. Andrew, do you want to take us through this paper?
Thank you, Chairman. This is one of the regular reports I present into Audit Committee, so hopefully members will be familiar with its format, and it relates to the progress against the audit plan and the performance of the team. Albeit Q3, we've been working under very difficult situations, difficult circumstances, and obviously the ongoing situation with COVID, which has impacted on our ability to undertake as much audit work as we'd intended. Members will hopefully remember that I brought a revised plan, which you agreed back in September, to concentrate on key areas moving forward. So that is what we are doing. We're progressing that as much as we can. I think, Chairman, if you're okay with this, I'll just go straight to the appendices, as this will be an easier way of explaining where we are, both in terms of performance and progress. You okay with that, Chair?
Yeah, that's fine, Andrew.
Thank you. So on page 77 of your packs, members, Appendix A gives 2 tables comparing 1920 with 2021, with a highlighted column for Q3. It shows that in Q3 in 2021, we've completed 42% of our audit plan. And the target would roughly be around 50%, given a fair wind at this time of the year, and the revised audit plan. So in terms of performance, we're working through that, but we're concentrating primarily on getting as much work as we possibly can done. So we are not capturing all of the data which we've captured before, and therefore the next 3 performance indicators I've put in as not applicable, because we're not religiously doing timesheets at the moment, because some of the staff are finding it more difficult than others to work at home and accommodate all the factors that go with that. But that said, we are continuing to provide financial training in service areas, and we provided 2 in Q3, and we're turning reports around in a fairly prompt manner as well. We're getting draft reports out within 6 days and final reports out within 2 days, which compares reasonably well with where we were this time last year. In terms of the actual work that we've undertaken and the opinions which we've issued, that's shown on Appendix B. We've sent out 3 good reports, good audit opinions, 3 reasonable opinions, and 1 unsatisfactory, totaling 12 audit-related opinion jobs that have gone out in Q3. Then I've listed those in terms of the individual jobs, categorised by the opinion, so good at first, then reasonable, moving on to unsatisfactory. We've also done some grant claim work where we've got unqualified and qualified, and unqualified is good. That means the terms and conditions of the grant paying body have generally been met. Qualified means that there were a couple of issues in terms of those terms and conditions, and we would have put a memo back to the grant paying organisation. Appendix C relates to non-opinion work, so we are continuing to give financial advice. As it's mentioned, we're continuing to provide financial training. We've prepared the annual governance statement, which feeds into the annual accounts, and we've picked up a couple of additional workloads as well, as you can see from the bottom, where we've been involved in more of a project from an overseeing perspective, and offering audit advice more on a formal basis. Appendix D, Chairman, is just a definition of what our opinions are. So that's in a nutshell for Q3 from me, Chairman, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions from anybody? I got one question, or it's an observation really, Andrew. On paragraph 8, the plan was for 1,208 days, something like that, and staff are delivering something like 626 days. Now, if you read that coldly, it would imply that they're not doing anything for 600 days. But going from what you just said, that staff are actually quite active, giving advice and doing other work around the audit plan. Can you just reassure committee that they are fully occupied?
Absolutely, Chairman. Yeah, they're certainly not sitting on their hands. We are continuing to offer advice. I mean, some work is taking a little bit longer than we'd hoped because of the situation at home, in actually getting hold of information. We're dealing with some frontline staff, we're dealing with social work staff, and they are busy dealing with delivering frontline services. So we are being respectful of that, and probably not being in people's faces as much as we have been previously, and it is taking a little bit longer to get the work back to us, and we've had to kind of go back to them more often than we would normally as well. But we are working our way through the plan at the moment, and the team are very busy.
Can I just suggest that we have that minuted? Because when we read the paper in isolation, it can perhaps give an impression that you know, that things aren't as active as you were explaining them. So from my point of view, when we review the annual governance statement, for example, we can place reassurance then on the fact that you're doing all this proactive work, which actually helps with the control environment.
Absolutely, yeah.
That minute they don't top up that report, then, because otherwise it's not giving a fair reflection of what you and the team are actually undertaking.
Okay, fair point, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions from anybody?
Yeah, Chair, just a quick one for Andrew. Are you back now working with a full team now as well now, or are you still a member of staff down?
We're still a member of staff down, Chairman, but we are covering that with external support from an internal audit specific organisation. So they've come in, they've hit the ground running. We've delegated some audit jobs to them specifically, so they're supporting us, but albeit, and we are managing them as part of our audit process. But from an internal perspective, we are still one auditor down, yeah.
Okay. Laura, I noticed you got a raised hand.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to check, it's on a similar task really to John's question. Obviously, you know, we know you're struggling with the man hours and an auditor down. How much of an impact has the last few months of COVID, and maybe not the last couple of months, but the very beginning when we almost sort of went into a shutdown, how much has that had on the audit plan, and how soon do you see you envisaging yourself catching up? Because I know every year you sort of dropped a couple of audits anyway, and there was always that sort of catch up. So how much now has this had that impact on making it even worse going forward? And how long do you see yourself taking to come back to any sort of sense of an even kilter on it, really?
And again, another fair question. The reason why we presented a revised plan in September was because we got redirected for the first 6 months of COVID, and we were significantly involved in counter fraud work with business grants and supporting the business grants team, and we helped out with some TTP as well. So there was limited audit work actually being undertaken for the first 6 months. We then had to reprioritise in terms of the workload going forward, and what we do every year, we look at what our population of audits can be, we assess the risk of those, and we work a plan based on that moving forward. So there will be an element of catch-up moving into 21-22. That will be taken into account in terms of our planning process, where we'll reprioritise the work and concentrate on those higher priority works first, and put the less important jobs on the back burner for future years. They'll all be undertaken in a risk assessment during the planning process.
Okay.
Can I have a follow up on that, if I may?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
Just as you were speaking, it just sort of popped into my head, really. I mean, is there any any lessons learned from the pandemic on COVID and the ways of working that you can carry forward now that you wouldn't have maybe have done previously? You know, sort of obviously we've all had to learn to deal with auditing remotely, which has its own challenges, you know, because people can hide, not that they do, but people can hide information trying to get the information. But is there anything that you've learned that you can now carry forward into this new normal, do you think?
Yes, certainly. I think access is quite important. Access to various service area systems and folders. We've progressed that, but not as well as I would have liked in some areas. So some areas are better at giving us full access to their systems than others. As I say, we've worked on that to a certain extent, so we can go in and we can look for the information ourselves, or be pointed in the direction of that information, as opposed to relying on service managers giving us that information. Also, getting the information electronically is important, which is a general observation across many services. Many are still paper driven. So when we've been requesting information, it's been a bit cumbersome coming through to us, because they're saying they have to go back into the Civic to get that information. It's held on files, held on paper files. Not everybody is digitized. We moved away from paper files as an audit team quite a few years ago. So everything we operate on is digitized. We scan all evidence paperwork into our systems, so we can demonstrate that we are paperless. Not all services have gone down that road, so I would encourage more services to do that, to make it easier on my team and the service managers for audits moving forward.
Okay. Are there any other questions before we move on? Because we've still got a few items left on the agenda to go through. No? Okay. Thanks for that, Andrew. So that's duly noted. So can we now go on to item 6, which is the Code of Corporate Governance? And if you could keep an eye on the time as well, please.
Yes, this is me again, Chairman. So thank you for getting this this item onto the agenda. This is the Code of Corporate Governance. Members will be familiar with the annual governance statement, which I prepare and have mentioned feeds into the financial statements, and is based on this actual Code of Corporate Governance. It's been remiss of me, really, my fault, for not getting this through Audit Committee previously, but the framework on which the annual governance statement is based, which is a SIPFA/SOLIS framework, was updated in 2016, and I updated the Code of Corporate Governance accordingly, but I didn't get it through to Audit Committee for your comments before getting it formally approved through Cabinet or Cabinet member. So this is why I'm bringing it to your attention now. I can reassure members that the actual annual governance statement has been based on this code, the revised code, since 1718. So it is up to date as possible, but I just need to formalise this going forward. The main changes are around the overarching principles of corporate governance, which are outlined in paragraph 6 on page 84 of your pack. 2 overarching principles with 5 other good governance principles in place. So what this code does is to bring that together to identify what the organisation should be doing, and that's shown in Appendix A in the table. So what's expected to demonstrate good, solid governance within Newport City Council based on those principles and sub-principles, and what have we actually got in place to demonstrate and evidence that we do have good governance in place. So that is included in the tables in the pack that you have in front of you. The intention then, Chairman, is to reduce the size of the annual governance statement by referring into the code where appropriate, and almost reporting by exception moving forward for the annual governance statement. It has gone through the performance team for comment and out to heads of service, and I'm just asking members for their comments and give them an opportunity to shape the code of governance as we see it now before it goes to formal approval for Cabinet.
I'm glad you said you're going to refer to it in the AGS, because that will strip out a lot of duplication. Because reading the code of practice, the code that you have is very, very similar to the AGS in a lot of areas. You know. Are there any questions or comments from Audit Committee? No?
Chair, you don't seem to be seeing the hand raised signal. Yeah, I've got a bemusement rather than an observation. Page 85, item 7, there are no financial issues related to this report. Well, when you change a method of working, either for better or worse, and usually in local government it means more information, more bureaucracy, there is a financial implication in officers' time. So will there be less officers' time required to comply with this code, or will there be more officers' time? In which case it's plus or minus. It's rarely a static.
Interesting question. I think that we incorporate annual governance statement compilation in the plan, and we always include 10 days in our plan for bringing that together, and that's been fairly static for the last couple of years. So unless I compare the planned allocation to the actual allocation, it's difficult for me to say that, but it's generally my time as part of my role is bringing this together. It's part of what I do, so I would say that any impact on the finances is minimal.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Councillor, I've only just had your hand raised on the internal audit plan as well. The hand raising for the Code of Corporate Governance still hasn't come through to me.
Oh, right.
So sorry about that, but did you have anything to raise as well on your audit plan?
No, it was just, it was a disappointment really that page 64, pressure on school budgets, has remained static, because the schools I'm involved with are really doing their best to get their budgets down to the required levels. And, you know, for the risk to be similar, just worries me that, you know, are other schools doing the best they can?
Chairman, I think that refers to the risk register, not the audit report.
Yeah, sorry, it does. That's what the chair just said, I think.
Yeah.
It's gone backward.
Okay.
You've only just seen the hand.
I've only just seen it, unfortunately. Yeah, that's technology is failing us a little bit. Okay, so are there any other comments on the Code of Corporate Governance? No? Okay, that's great. Thanks, Andrews. That's duly noted, and look forward to seeing a shortened AGS going forward.
Thank you, Chairman.
If we therefore go on to the next item, which is financial memorandum. So this is Wales Audit Office report. Gareth, do you want to take us through it?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is our audit of accounts memorandum, which summarises our recommendations arising from our audit of the 2019-20 statement of accounts for Newport City Council and Newport City Council Group. Hopefully members will see that it's a fairly short report, so a short memorandum in that sense, and that's largely because in September we presented our audit of accounts report, our ISO 260 report, which summarised the principal findings arising from the audit and the impacts on that set of accounts. What this memorandum now tries to do is just summarise some of the recommendations arising from that work that can be carried forward and implemented to improve future accounts and audit processes. So that's the purpose of this report. You'll see in the memorandum there's three principal recommendations. One is flagged up as high priority and two as medium. The item raised as high priority just regards the treatment of accruals at year end. A bit of a technical accounting point, but given that the COVID-19 pandemic arose right at the year end period last year, we noted a few instances during our audit where items had been accrued, so included in the 2019-20 accounts, but goods or the underlying activities hadn't actually been received, and so under accounting conventions they shouldn't have been included in that accounting period. We were satisfied for 2019-20 that there was no material impact, but there's a fairly substantial risk if that matter wasn't tackled that there could be more substantial material risk going forward. But management have agreed to that recommendation, and we'll work with them over the coming year now as we plan for next year's audit to take that forward and make sure that that doesn't reoccur as an issue this year. There's also another two recommendations flagged up in the report, one relating to the version control of audit working papers, and one also relating to the classification of certain items in the accounts that loosely relate to cash and cash equivalents. So there were a few errors in last year's accounts relating to some amounts within that part of the accounts. But you know, as mentioned, all of the recommendations that we've raised here have been accepted by management. They'll now form part of our planning process as we work forward for the 2021 accounts and audit process. So we'll just follow that up as part of that work. So really that's all I wanted to say, Chair, on this report, but happy to take any questions anyone has.
Okay, Councillor Hooran, you've got your hand raised.
And in the right place this time. Thank you, Gareth. The thing that gave me most concerns was the working version of figures being used, and I think you termed hard coding audit sequences. Do you give reasonable notice that the audit is going to take place on the whenever? Because obviously all of our colleagues in the council are stressed and stretched at the moment to provide figures on time, and it's causing you double the amount of work if you've got to review 2 sets of figures, and similarly it's causing them great problems if they've got to refine their figures. So do you give adequate notice, and you know, are our staff cooperating with you in terms of getting the right documents to you on time?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I mean, in terms of cooperation, there's no issues raised from us on that front. We feel we have a really good working relationship with staff across the council that are involved in the accounts and audit process. So no concerns there. I suppose the point that's raised here is less a matter of. I suppose it's just a matter of, you know, sometimes figures just being hard coded into the working papers as opposed to the evidence being clearly available. So it just means that we have to ask further questions, interrogate a little bit further, take a bit more time to actually, you know, to understand what's going on from those working papers, and just be able to draw a conclusion as the external auditors. So it's a matter of efficiency as opposed to anything fundamentally wrong, you know, with the working papers that are there. So really just a matter of fine-tuning things and you know, improving things for future years.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any other queries or observations on this report? No? Okay, we duly note the paper. Thanks for the update, Dan.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, and we're now on to item 8, which is capital and treasury management strategy. Myron, do you want to lead on this?
Chair, Owen will lead on the introduction to the report.
Okay, thank you. And if
I'm
keep an eye on time, please, because obviously I think we're overrunning a little bit.
Yeah, hi Chair. Apologies if there's any background noise. I've got 2 little ones who are currently being put to bed in a couple of rooms down the corridor, so there might be a bit of noise. So this report presents to Audit Committee the capital and treasury management strategies. Audit are asked to give their observation and comments on the strategies before it goes to Cabinet, who will then recommend it for final approval at Council. So I'll break it down into the 2 parts, one the capital strategy and secondly the treasury management strategy. I'll keep it as brief as I can, Chair, but they are quite complex and big documents, but I will try and summarise them as best I can and just give the key points, but if there's any further questions then we're happy to take them. So the capital strategy I'll start with, that sets out the long-term context. We take it long-term as 10 years in which capital decisions are made and how we link that to our medium-term financial plan. So it demonstrates that the council takes into account the stewardship, value for money, and importantly, as part of the Prudential Code, the SIP for Prudential Code, affordability, sustainability and prudence of its plans, of our capital strategy plans. So what the report does and the cover report shows is 2 sections essentially of the capital strategy. We break it down into our current capital programme and the impact of that, and then further beyond that sets out the short term. Bear with me a second. Sorry. As I said, one broke free from my wife then.
That's okay.
Yeah. So we break it down into the 2 areas. One, the current capital programme, and secondly, what happens beyond the current capital programme. So in terms of the current capital programme, you'll see from the report that there is a significant programme which has been set, which is currently at 251.9 million up to 24-25. This is a significant programme, and the next few years shows a significant increase in the borrowing required to carry out carry out the duties of that programme. So if you look at paragraphs 9 and 10, it essentially shows the significant increase in borrowing over the next 3 to 4 years. You'll see that at the end of this financial year in paragraph 10, we've got an estimated external borrowing of 164 million, but we estimate if the programme is carried out with the plans that are currently in, that the external borrowing will increase by over £70 million to £234 million. So that shows a significant ramping up of external borrowing over the next 3 to 4 years. So therefore, the message here to Cabinet and essentially to Council who set the borrowing limits is that we need to have a limit which is sustainable. So you'll see the table in paragraph 9, and we now set an operational boundary, which is the lower boundary. We set a limit to Council that they cannot go above what's in the current capital programme without getting further approval from Council. So Cabinet and officers cannot go above the current approved capital programme without going back to Council. So that's a very important limit that we're putting in there. The authorised limit, which is shown, essentially gives is there for Treasury management purposes, that we can undertake external borrowing earlier if we feel necessary to take us up to what we call our capital financing requirement. So that gives us the cash flow and Treasury management ability to kind of do that. But the important one for the capital programme and the limit on Cabinet for the capital programme is the operational boundary set there. So you'll see that next year is set at 187 million, going up to the 234 million pound, which I referred to previously. The next impact of that, so the impact of that external borrowing is essentially we've got about a 2.7 million pound increase in the capital financing cost forecast over the next 4 years. So you'll see that further down in the table where we go beyond the current capital programme. If you look at chart 1, which is paragraph 15, you'll see a very steep line from 21-22 onwards to 24-25, which is essentially showing a pressure of £2.6 million due to the capital financing costs. So beyond the current capital programme, we're saying that isn't sustainable if that steepness continues. So the head of finance is recommending to Council that beyond the current capital programme, a limit is put on to future borrowing, and we cannot continue at the same significant levels that are currently in the capital programme. So essentially, we've modelled two scenarios. One is modelling an external borrowing at £5.5 million per annum, and one is debt-funded expenditure at £7.5 million per annum. Essentially, both show an increasing capital financing costs. On to the Treasury management strategy. Essentially, the Treasury management strategy is very similar to previous years, in that we will continue to keep our borrowing to our new long-term borrowing to a minimum where possible. However, our capacity to be internally borrowed is reducing over time, and we will need to undertake some external borrowing, which is being shown by the capital strategy essentially. The investment strategy, so that's similar to previous. We invest funds prudently, and we have first regard to security and liquidity over trying to achieve high interest rates and high yields. However, on that, we do hold a minimum balance of £10 million of cash investments. Currently, we haven't been putting that into any high yielding. It's been very prudently invested due to the pandemic. However, our Treasury management advisors are saying that there are some secure places that we can put this, such as different property funds, equity funds, things like that in 21-22. So we are looking to invest that £10 million into higher interest yields. We finished the report with a head of finance summary where Myrion sets out the main messages and his thoughts on 1, affordability, 2, sustainability, and 3, prudency. So in regards to affordability, you'll be able to note from the report that there's a significant increase in the next 3 years. Myrion is satisfied that in the short term that's affordable because we had a good settlement from Welsh Government, and part of that RSG has been put to future capital financing costs. So the £2.6 million pressure that I talked about over the next 3-4 years has now been earmarked out of this year's revenue support grant. So therefore, Myrion is satisfied that it's affordable in the short term. However, we have got an unbalanced budget over the next 3 years, and with revenue capital financing increasing over the medium to short term and our current low funding base, this needs to be kept a good eye on. So for example, if funding from Welsh Government is reduced in future years, we are locked in the long term, and we can't make savings on this because we're essentially taking out long-term borrowing. So we're locking the council into these pressures. In terms of sustainability, the costs are increasing, as we've said before, but also internal borrowing capacity is reducing over time. Therefore, there's little room for other savings, and it puts pressure onto other service area budgets. So therefore, that they're key messages which are being put across these 2 reports. So essentially, we're asking Audit Committee today to make comment on the report and giving feedback really on other messages that are coming across, the observations on affordability, sustainability, and prudency clear and well thought out, and also the operational limits which are being put on the council, which have been requested previously quite clearly from Audit Committee. Do they satisfy Audit Committee's previous comments? And as the reasoning and the limits on the Treasury Management Strategy is clear, and the arrangements for the report going forward in terms of you making the comment, Cabinet then endorsing it to Council for approval. So that's that, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Owen. I notice Jason has got his hand raised, and I've got a couple of queries myself. So, Jason.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just on page 124 on the table where you have the potential indicator, the budget 21-22, we've got a total expenditure 62.3 million, and then 22-23 71.6. How come there's been some dramatic increase then from 2020 to 2021?
So yeah, so this is something that probably the chair will come on to, I would imagine, around not putting words into his mouth, but around slippage that we've seen in previous years. However, as we're getting to the back end of the programme, we do need to finish off quite a few of these schemes. So a lot of that relates to the Bambi schools projects. Also, there are some big schemes up and coming within those years. Also, what's happened is City Deal has accelerated its programme forward into largely 21, 22 and 22, 23. So there's been an increase in the City Deal costs there, but a number of the grant funded kind of schemes are also being done in the next two years. So yeah, there's quite a lot of grant funded, but also the capital programme is shown further down in Appendix 1. So you will see the detail of the capital programme, but essentially it is the finishing off of the current capital programme.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Laura, you had your hand raised.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just got two points that I wanted to raise or queries. First off, obviously, capital investment. Obviously, this is medium to long term. So I'm just wondering, thinking of what's happened in the last 12 months, how much got wiped off our investments because of what happened? In terms of are we into risky or medium risk sort of investment? That was my one. And then obviously looking forward, because we're all going in with the weather I know and what's going to happen next. And then a separate question then was to do with the transporter bridge. So I see there's an investment line across there, and obviously there's we've had some news of a big investment from the Lottery Commission of is it 85 million or
no, 8.5.
8.5 million. Sorry. Has that changed that line at all then?
I'll check with Laura Marnie, who's on the call on that. I believe because we were aware of the lottery fund coming through that we had put that in. So the amount included in there includes a phase 1 lottery funding plus the phase 2, which has just been approved, and any funding that we've put in ourselves for that. So I'm pretty sure that's the case. Laura will shout it if it's not, but we had already preempted that because we've been in discussions around this for quite a long time. So it's been put on our programme. In terms of your first point around investments, we hadn't put any investments into any risky or any areas really prior to the COVID pandemic. So therefore, from an investment balance, we haven't lost any money at all. However, I would say that the interest that we're getting on our current cash balances is very, very low. You're talking 0%, and on some days, if we find it hard to place our money places, we place it with what's called the DMO, which is the government. They're giving you negative interest rates at the moment. And that's why it's important that while we'll do it securely, it's probably worth moving that £10 million into some higher yielding investments going into 21-22. We did plan to do it this year, but we haven't because of the pandemic. So things have stabilised, and that's what we're being told by our advisors. Yes, we didn't have anything in 2021, but going into 21-22, things have stabilised, and the hit on the kind of investments that local authorities have been doing hasn't been that big. So yeah, we didn't lose any investment kind of capital values, but we have been getting very low interest rates, very, very low.
Oh, okay, thanks for that. Phil, did you have a query?
Yes, Owen, in your preamble, you said we'd had a good rate support grant from the Welsh Assembly Government this year. Well, we don't believe we have. We've had an adequate one, or if you like, a better than expected one, but it's based on our population rather than them giving us a higher grant this year. So it's purely and simply dividing up the same cake slightly differently.
Okay, yeah. Message taken. Yeah, just that probably good in context to what we were planning. I would say you are right. Our plans were a lot lower than actually what we got, so we might want to come in there, but yeah, point taken.
Thank you.
Would you guys say something, Myron?
No, I mean, we did get a very good settlement compared to what we were planning on, for sure. And there was that retrospective adjustments made as well, which was a reasonably large part of that additional money. So yes, in the sense that we are being now funded based on an updated, hopefully more correct population base, we are getting what we are due. It's I can understand where that point is coming from, Councillor Hounahan. So yeah, that's fine.
Okay, thanks. Kate,
am I? Yes, I'm on. Just on that point again. I mean, I believe the development of Llanwern is 4,000 properties. and at Cot Hill it's over 2,000 properties. When do Welsh Government normally, you know, do count the numbers to pass on the money? You know, I don't suppose you're ever looking in advance at these things, but could they be like 12 months behind, which would be significant for us, considering the size of the developments which are taking place at the moment?
Yeah, I'm not aware of the absolute detailed process what's going to go through, but clearly there's a census every 10 years that probably takes 12, 18 months, 2 years to collate. So there's some certainty at that point because it's based on real collected data. From that point to the next sort of 10-year point, they use population estimates that the ONS uses, and that uses a kind of that uses death and birth population figures to essentially then adjust that figure then sort of forwards. So it doesn't include you know, people that are moving in, for example. So I think you raise a good point. If a city like Newport is growing, how does the inward migration, shall we call it, get included in those figures, as opposed to just the normal deaths and births issues? I don't know the answer to that specifically, but I will try and speak to some Welsh Government colleagues to try and get us an answer. I'm happy to come back on that.
I would have thought that we did produce our own figures as well, because I can't imagine people getting away without paying council tax, for example. You know,
for sure.
It's just this Welsh Government acknowledgement, really, which could really give us serious problems, couldn't it, when we're expanding and going to have to provide so many extra services.
Yes, when you're expanding that fast and you've got thousands of properties being built, and you know, a 10-year horizon for those schemes is probably not unrealistic, is it? It does cause issues. Clearly, some populations stats, for example, school numbers, the number of kids in our schools, they're collected annually. Yes. So actually, the migration stuff is kind of sorted out in terms of that kind of stuff. But the general population numbers, I will ask some Welsh Government contacts to see what, if anything, that they do on those.
Okay. Might just in on that point. This year will be the last census.
Yes, I thought the last one was the last census, actually.
No, this one now coming up is the last census, and the British government or the English government are saying that they've got better ways of collating the number of people. And you know, the things that we've mentioned previously, like housing, is no defined level of population, because nobody really knows how many people live in a house. But it's very interesting, and it'd be great if you could get back to us on that one, Margaret.
Yeah, I will do.
That's great. So with an eye on the time, because we're overrunning a little bit, I've just got a couple of comments, if I may. I don't think we need to discuss this, but in terms of the report itself, because you wanted comments.
Yes, please.
I think the report itself is a bit confusing insofar as, on the one hand, we're saying that we've got unsustainable debt potentially going forward. We have high levels of financing costs compared to other authorities. Questions there would be, well, how high is high? You know, are we marginally different or a lot different? I think then we're making references to head of finance recommendations, but when I go to the head of finance summary, a lot of it is replicating what's already in the paper. I couldn't really tease out the recommendations that clearly, so I'm reading the text, which is all words around unsustainable, very high debt levels. And it's not really coming through then the recommendations as to what it is the paper's trying to achieve. And I think finally then, this is something I've raised before with Treasury management. The level of borrowing is basically based on what the capital programme is. There's no real strategy around what we plan to do with borrowing or investments, apart from internal borrowing being used, etc. And I just think the paper itself could be more clearly summarised. So, for example, one last thing, the operational boundaries. Well, if the boundaries created by the capital financing requirement, the true level that you can go up to is the authorised limits. So if you were saying that some of the debt levels are too high, potentially, or could be going further forward, then shouldn't the operational boundary be amended or clarified within the paper to say, hang on a sec, this level is really causing me as a head of finance a problem. So what level should it be then for you not to have a problem? It's not really for discussion because it's your report anyway, but when I read it cold, I just thought it's not really hanging together as well as it could do, I don't think. So if I was in council, I'd be a bit concerned about, well, what is the right level of debt that we should be operating to then? And does it mean that our capital programme is too ambitious for what funds we have? If that's the case, I think the report should say that.
So, Chair.
There was a leader,
just,
but
just to be clear, what I'm saying here is that because we have funded the capital financing revenue costs of the current programme to the end of 23-24, then that is affordable. It takes us to a position which is a very high level of revenue cost that we have to spend on servicing debt, certainly compared to our peers, but it is no more than what it is currently as a percentage of our budget. And the risk that funding slows down in the future, but of course this budget can't be changed because you're locked in, is no different then. So again, that is not a new risk. So I guess for the next 4 years, and I will reflect on your comments there, Chair. The actual advice to the council is, this is affordable. Yes, it takes us to a reasonably high level of revenue, cost, and debt, but as a percentage of our budget, it's nothing. It's not much additional to where we are now. That's fine. I think the key recommendation is actually beyond this 4-year period. That steep line, I mean, is just too steep to sustain, and we've exemplified what that would look like at those two levels that Owen mentioned. A decision on those is not required at this point, but I'm just kind of, I suppose, warming up council to sort of say, we can't carry on at this level. It will then be for the cabinet of the day to manage the capital programme within those borrowing limits. And actually, more than half of our capital programme is funded from grants, etc. So even with, let's say, a £7 million annual borrowing, say over 5 years, £35 million, you're probably looking at a capital programme of well in excess of £70–80 million when the grants funded elements are also included, same as the transporter bridge that was mentioned previously. So I will reflect on your point about being sort of clear, and we'll sharpen up that element. But I just wanted to make it clear, yes, it's affordable over the next 3 or 4 years because it's in the budget now, or it's going to be. That was in the draft budget. Yes, the budget has a high level of it linked to paying off debts and interest, but this will make it no higher. Okay. And the risk that funding slows down in the future because the UK is in such a huge amount of debt is not a new risk, but this budget cannot be changed in the short term. So I'll reflect on that, Chair, and we'll just have to make sure that is clearer, and thank you for that.
Okay, Chair, if I can just come in, I just want a quick comment when you talked about the operational boundary and the authorised limit. On paragraph 9, we have set the operational boundary limit, the operational limit at the level which is affordable and what the current programme says. So that is the low level that Myrian is recommending to council that will deliver the current capital programme.
Yeah.
Anything above that will have to go back to council for approval.
It just needs to be clearer, I think. Okay.
That's fine, Chair.
With an eye on the time, is there anything else from anyone else before we move on? Because you only wanted comments, didn't you? Say something.
I was just going to say, Chair, I think the next meeting of the Audit Committee is at the very end of March, I think.
That's right.
So
yeah.
just from me, this will be Owen's last meeting at the Audit Committee. Owen is leaving for pastures new with a role in the NHS. So obviously we're very pleased for Owen, but will be difficult and big shoes to fulfill. So I just wanted the committee to know that, and yeah.
Yeah, news to us. Congratulations, Owen, and thanks for all your hard work for the years for Newport Council. All the best in the future.
Thank you.
Okay, that's great. Anything else before we move on?
Yeah. Sorry, Chair. Just a quick one. I'm not quite sure if this is in with the capital, but capital stuff, everything else, I'm not quite sure. Now, because of the year now, through COVID, now everything else this year now, have we saved a lot of money, more money there this year than expected as well? Or, and with that, if the money we've expected we saved, would that be put into then towards this year's budget as well?
So it's a mixed picture, I would say, Councillor Jordan. So some aspects of the budget, such as delivering savings, has been much more difficult and in many situations cannot be achieved. So that's actually a pressure on the revenue budget this year. On the other side, there has been opportunities to make savings. So less officers are travelling around. The office expenses are much lower because the offices are empty, and people have transitioned or transitioning to digital ways of working. Schools, have been closed, for a lot of this year in terms of the academic year. So we are, Cabinet had a revenue budget monitor in their January meeting, and that showed a significant, just under £3 million underspend. And that is because we have been, whilst there has been cost increases in some areas, it's been more than offset by cost reductions elsewhere. But some of that is also due to reduction in the number of people, let's say, within the social care system. And actually, whilst our social care colleagues would probably be able to put more people into, say, care homes, etc., because the voids are clearly unaffordable for those organisations. The Welsh Government's Hardship Fund has been covering those voids costs this year. So, will it impact on next year's budget? No, because it's a saving on this year's budget. It will go into reserves, and the Cabinet in due course will make a decision as to what to use it for. But it doesn't automatically come into next year's budget. Some of the areas where we've saved money on, such as, let's say, travelling, some of them do feature as permanent budget savings in going forward, and so we will see some aspects being, embedded within future year budgets.
So that would Modi say then, would they sort of might use some of that money then and to go towards maybe reduction in the council tax for the people in Newport then, would it? Or?
Well, not necessarily, because obviously council tax funds the day-to-day ongoing base budget of the council. The savings that we've got in this year's budget are one-off savings from this year's budget. They don't deal with the ongoing base budget issues. So the answer to that is no, it doesn't necessarily give Cabinet the opportunity to deal with council tax on a permanent basis.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, what I was trying to get at then, if we've got that savings there, even though just for this year as such, would they be able to use some of that money then to offset then for this year's budget to reduce a council tax with people know with COVID, everything else, you know, and people who are furloughed, people have lost their jobs, you know, that's would they use some of that to maybe offset a little bit more of the budget sort of thing?
Well, not on a sustainable basis, no, because as I said to you, council tax is there every year for the ongoing base budget of the council. The saving this year is a one-off saving, and therefore whatever saving it is at year end can only be spent once, whereas council tax is needed every single year in a sustainable way. Obviously, Cabinet will be making a decision on how they use that one-off money in due course over the next few sort of months.
Okay, does that answer the query? Okay,
yeah, thanks.
That's great, thanks. So thanks for that, everyone. So we're on to are we happy to move on to the last item? Yeah, okay. So that report has been commented on. So we're now on to the draft work programme, which highlights the meetings that we got over the next year. Are there any comments to make on the draft work programme?
Yeah, just in case on the one for date for the 25th of March. I don't know what's happening yet, though. I might be still going away, or it looks like I'll be staying put.
Okay, we'll take note of that as time goes on. Any other comments before we accept the?
Yes, Chair. There's a couple of things which we just need to tweak. There's a move around in terms of the order of when they're going to be presented, and there's a couple of duplications. So I'll speak to Pam and Anne outside the meeting to make sure they're updated for the next Audit Committee meeting, Chair, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's great.
Thanks.
Any other comments?
Just one from me as well, Chair. Just for the March meeting, next up, we'll be expecting to present our annual audit plan as well to that meeting. But again, we'll just liaise with Pam to make sure that's on the agenda for that.
Yeah, make sure it's on the agenda. Okay, so anything else? A bit longer than I thought, but there we are. So thanks for attending, everyone, and we'll meet up again in March.
Yep. Cheers. Ta-ra.
Thanks very much.
Good night.